Hi friends, this is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight. Today I want to go over the dual tabulation issue in the ES&S voting equipment, that is the election systems and software. It is going to be of importance in this upcoming election, especially now that a lot of people are starting to gather up cast vote records and compare them with the official results. And they may find some anomalies there that are actually not really there. They're just an artifact of some possible failures in how things are accumulated in these systems. Now this particular issue affects the DS200 voting machine that's used in precincts, but it may actually impact other voting machines depending upon how they're used. At least half of it might affect other machines, half of the issues that we found. What happens is it results in a cast vote record data and actually also the ballot image data, which is different from the aggregated total data. And I will be defining all that in a minute here. We discovered this in Volusia County, Florida, in the general election in 2020. When we did a ballot image audit using the AuditEngine platform, which I am, interested in having people use. All right, let's go on to the first slide. So what are the two tabulations? So first of all, ES&S maintains these two tabulations inside the voting machine. One I'm going to be calling the aggregated tabulation, or sometimes I'll call it the accumulated tabulation. This is when things are added up, and it consists only of the totals for each candidate. And the other is a cast vote record, which has a record for each ballot. So the aggregated tabulation is something that they started with when they first generated these machines. This is my theory about how it happened, because this is how a lot of times equipment is put together. So they had the original equipment that used only this aggregated tabulation methodology, and it's essentially like a clicker where you would every time somebody votes for that candidate, it's like you're pressing on the click here, but of course this is implemented in software. There's no audit trail available with this type of tabulation, and that was a problem. So you can't tell if those clicks happen at the beginning, at the end, or for which ballot. So you really couldn't audit anything. You could also initialize this or maybe reset it or something in software. Even worse, lose track, because if the power goes off or something, and if this is done in software, it's not like one of these physical devices, it will actually lose all of its counts. The aggregated reports are what you find when the polls are closed. These are printed out on a paper tape, and the early ES&S machines only had this type of report, and there was no way to audit the results. So in this report you can see we have Donald Trump with 63 votes and Rocky de la Fuente with only 2 votes, and this was in the primary. This example data here. So this type of audit report has no way to audit it, because you see the totals are every ballot is already added up. However, the cast vote records provide a ballot by ballot record of the vote, and then you can use that to audit the results, because each item in the list should match the ballot that was scanned. Now this makes it harder to fudge the results, because you have to go in and modify those individual records. Not that it's a huge difference, but it is actually going to be harder. The other one, you just change the value. You just say, well, instead of 46, I'm going to make it 1,046. And in the other one, I'm going to reduce it by a certain amount, and no one could really track that down. But here, you'd actually have to go into the records and modify each one. So it is harder. The cast vote record in ES&S is exported from the election management system, or EMS. I'm going to talk about that from time to time is the EMS. So the EMS is the software that is the entirety of their system, not just of individual voting machine, but the software that runs in the central office that coordinates the entire election. And at the end of the election, they can export these into spreadsheets, which are typically, XLSX. So it's the Excel styles, data format. The first column has the cast vote record, which is like the ballot ID number. And this is typically in this type of machine, it just starts, sometimes at 1 and goes all the way up, incrementing. You have precinct numbers, which are assigned by that, and there's sometimes a ballot style in here as well. And then what you have across the top here is columns, and in each column you see here's president and vice president, and then under that, if it's a vote for Trump, in this case it'll say Republican Donald J. Trump, and if it's a vote for Biden, it says Democrat Joseph R. Biden, all the way down. So you could add these up and say how many of these are in this column. You could add that up at the bottom. Now there's a one case here where you can't actually use a pure pivot table to add these up, and that's if you have a vote for more than one. And then if they do that, like let's say it's a school board and you can vote for 2 or 3, it'll have 2 or 3 columns here that all say school board, school board, school board, or sometimes these are left blank at the top. And then you'll have whatever they voted for. So in the first column might be Joe Blow, and the next one would be Susie Q, and then possibly Susie Q would occur in the first column, and then some third guy in the second column, and so forth. So you actually have to use all of the columns, and typically a pure pivot table operation doesn't do that. So you'd have to do that by hand. Also, these are typically in separate files. There's only 99, basically one less than 100,000 records per file, or they won't load. So that's good that they do that. And this is just a snip of the file, of course. In 2020, there were 4 files for Volusia County, and there were 69 columns for each voting opportunity. Now, not all of those columns appear on every ballot, but they have in the cast vote record a column for every single possible contest and option. Ballot images are basically a scan of both sides of the ballot, and there's 2 images for each ballot sheet, the front and the back, usually put into one like a PDF file. And these images are created within the machine, and then they're processed by that system to detect the marks that denote the votes. So if you want to vote, you darken in the bubble. And then the machine goes in and finds these index marks and says, okay, that's where that bubble is. Okay, that means this. And they recognize those marks, and that's how they work. So very, very, if you put good marks here, this thing is going to be very accurate in terms of adding up your totals. They are an important record, and they should be preserved. So you want to make sure we get these. Some counties, though, in Florida, for example, are deleting their ballot images despite rules that require that all election data is saved for the 22 months. And there are some lawsuits over this. Of course, we believe that's incorrect, what they're doing there. The ballot images are recorded to the USB thumb drives. Now, I didn't really go over this, but in this machine, let's go up to that first picture. So in this machine, underneath this little door right here is a thumb drive, like a USB slot, and you can plug in a thumb drive there, which has up to, in this generation of machine, 4 gigabytes of memory. And it can save quite a few ballot images and totals in there. I think something like 30,000 or so. Depends on actually the size and format of each ballot. But those are saved onto the thumb drives so that they can be recovered. Now, The two tabulations, what I'm talking about, which is the aggregated totals and the cast vote record, and the cast vote record and the ballot images are kind of tied together. So if you get a cast vote record, you get a ballot image. Inside a machine, we haven't found any evidence that these two things differ. Okay, kind of want to highlight here without moving things around. So inside the machine, so if you said, is this machine producing accurate results, and you'd say, yeah, they are. That's not where the problem happens. It actually happens when they are transferred to the election management system. Now, interestingly, they do not generate the aggregated totals from the CVR. And as I say, the reason for that was those aggregated totals were implemented first. They had those little clicker things inside, and they did that. Basically, the software was clicking those totals for every vote, and at the end they just read them off. Then they added the cast vote record later as an auditing tool, but they don't they didn't do it the other way around. We'll say we're only going to do the CVR now, get the totals, and then figure it out. They only do it with the aggregated, the little clicker totals. Now, when these voting machines only have data for one or a few precincts, some of them can have many precincts in them, like if you're in a voting center. But typically at, say, on election day, you're only going to have a few precincts in the machine. But you could have many precincts in there. But the point is that you have to take the data out of this machine and aggregate it with all of the rest of the machines and the other precincts. So now at the end of the voting period, the polls are closed, and those aggregated totals, the CVR and the ballot images are written to the USB drive, and at that point they all match, as I said, and they're also encrypted when they're written here. I don't know if I say that, but now in some areas the aggregated data is also transmitted by cell modem to the election office directly, and sometimes they have to plug it in to the port, and then it's a little extra device, or sometimes it's inside the machine, and that transmits the data directly to the election office using a cell modem transmission that's encrypted. There's some debate about whether, or there's some, certainly some people are concerned about having these, and certainly I am, and because it does leave a little bit of a potential backdoor for manipulation of the code if you have a cell modem available. So you got to be careful of that. But here in Volusia County, they were using them. Okay, so we got to keep that in mind. The USB flash drive, as I said, is encrypted, and then it's hand carried. They put it in a secure pouch, and then they hand carry it to the election office at the end. But it takes a little bit longer, so they want to get the cell modem. In Florida, they're really crazy about wanting to get these results really fast. So they get the transmitted by cell modem, so they get the results super fast, and then the news media likes them because they're getting the results out super fast. But meanwhile, later, the data in the thumb drives are transported in and then read in, and that may take days, maybe days, a few days later. And when they do that off those thumb drives, they do have the aggregated totals. They do have the CVR data, and should have the ballot images if they did not delete them. Some of them are. Inside the EMS, they combine all the data. So the aggregated tabulation is read from the thumb drive or possibly from the cell modem transmission. And then the aggregated data is used to create the official tabulation, not the CVR. Okay? The CVR data and ballot images are not used in the generation of the official canvass results, but it only exists for the audits. So they can differ, and you may not even know it. So in 2020, we're going to go over the situation there. We found the evidence of two types of errors that occurred, and it was kind of good that we found both of them at one time, because then we could see examples of what could be the full gamut of, but maybe there's others. It could be all the different ways. Compared with the aggregated tabulation, the CVR can either, so when you compare them, when you compare the CVR with the aggregated tabulation, the CVR can have either more records, which also match the ballot images, or they can have too few records. Okay. And that would also match the ballot images. So usually what we've seen is the cast vote record and the ballot images are always the same. They correlate with each other. But there may be too many cast vote records and ballot images are too few compared to the aggregated totals. Now, how do we know that? We're going to go over the scenario here. And I'm kind of showing this sort of schematically. This is not a physical representation, but a schematic representation for how the data would move and how it would be added up. So we started here with the early voting center. And that they closed that early voting center. It was in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, which is in Volusia County. They got the USB flash drive data. And then they went through this, what they call the acquiring process, which basically uploads the data into the machine. So they closed the, this is a little bit prior to Election Day. It may have been early on Election Day, actually, before the polls closed, though. And they brought in, because at this point the early voting centers closed, and they may have been open for a couple of weeks. There were several machines at that polling location, I think at least 3. When the data is acquired in general, both the aggregated tabulation and the CVRs and the ballot images are read because they're read off the thumb drive. Now, early voting centers don't have any cell modems. The aggregated totals here are being read out here with a red line, and they go up here to the accumulated tabulation, also using the word aggregated tabulation. So everything is added up, and then we further add it up. So we take the 46 votes for Trump in this one, and we add that to, the others that are there, and we continue to add that up as we go. And then going in this direction are the cast vote records and ballot images when they're read in. So we have that set of data in tabulation 2, and in tabulation 1 is where the aggregated totals come in. There is no cell modem transmission at, from these early voting sites. Okay, let's go on. The next step is, well, when they started doing this, they read in the first drive, and the first drive was successful, but the second thumb drive failed. They could not read it. So the election officials decided to start over and just rescan everything. I think because they may have not been certain that they had a perfect correlation of the paper to the thumb drives, and if you said, okay, well, let's take what was in the first thumb drive and then start from the second one, you'd have to say, well, we have to make sure that we only have the paper from that second drive. So they said, well, in order to be sure that we get it accurately, let's go ahead and clear out the election completely and rescan all the ballots from that voting center. Now, this was done with full public observation, and wasn't in secret or anything. Everybody noticed, they were told what was happening, and we had at least one volunteer who was there watching that reported this to us. So the next step was they issued the clear command, and we know now that the clear command only affects tabulation 1, so it zeroes out the accumulated tabulation. It does not zero out automatically the cast vote records and the ballot images down here. So if you don't do anything else, this clear command only affects this aggregated tabulation, and that's what they did. Next step was they rescanned all of the ballots from the New Smyrna Beach early voting site, and in that case they were scanned, and we got new aggregated totals that came in, and we had new cast vote records and ballot images. But these had already, that first thumb drive was already in here. So we have that first thumb drive added back in again. So we have duplicate. We had the CVRs and ballot images were added to the ones that were already uploaded. This resulted in about 5,000 repeated ballots in the CVRs and ballot images. So we looked at the ballot images because we expected to find 5,000 duplicates. They're very hard to find because a lot of them just look the same, and they're either not the same or there isn't a lot of distinguishing marks. So in this case, though, we found these very distinctive marks, and you can see we have two different ballot IDs here. And so this one was maybe scanned later, and this was the original one from the original drive. So now, let's see, going back here, we had the central scanning scan those ballots, and then the ones from that first drive were scanned again. I think we got more images and more cast vote records for those ones, for the ballots that came in off of that first thumb drive and were not cleared by this clear command. Going on then, when the polls close later on election day, so that those first early votes came in and were all the ones from that particular voting center and the ones from all the other voting centers were basically acquired, and it was only the central scanning from that one site that occurred here. Now, we have cellular uploads that occur at each machine loads their accumulated totals by cell modem to the central office. They do not transmit the cast vote records or ballot images, even though the ballot images are pretty big, but the cast vote records aren't that big, so those could actually be sent in. But historically, they didn't do that, so they're only sending in the accumulated part. And then later, maybe days later, the thumb drives are brought in and uploaded. So they plug them in, and it reads in the accumulated tabulation from those, and also the cast vote records and ballot images. Now, supposedly the accumulated tabulation from the thumb drives will dominate and overwrite, or it will be accepted if there's any difference between that and the existing cellular uploads. But we didn't see any sign that they were ever comparing this, and I think maybe this is not done, or it could just blindly overwrite it. I don't know. So in this case, one of the thumb drives was inadvertently not uploaded because there is not a really good tracking of the thumb drives by ES&S. And so one was missed. And so in that case, no cast vote records or ballot images were uploaded from that machine. However, we did get the cellular uploads. So the accumulated tabulation is good, but the cast vote record and ballot image exports are missing those ballots from that one center, that one polling place. Thus, when the ballots were rescanned, it added repeated ballots with different ballot ID numbers for the newly scanned ballots, but the ballots from the first thumb drive already existed because they were not cleared by that clear command. So we ended up with about 5,000 repeated cast vote records and ballot images, which were of the same physical ballots, but where the images were slightly different. As you saw there, those images, even though it's obviously this is the same ballot, because no one's going to be able to reconstruct this. All right, but see, the images are a little bit different. These have scratches on it, and the image itself is going to be a little bit different, of course, because each scan of even if it's the same ballot is going to come out a little bit different. Now, so finally, the final CVR and the aggregated tabulation thus differ. When one thumb drive was not uploaded, the CVR and ballot images from that machine were not included, and yet the official totals were still correct because they were generated only from the aggregated totals. Adding up the CVR and comparing it with the aggregated totals may not match. Okay, but still, because they're working only with aggregated totals, the canvas itself may still be good. even though the CVR does not match. So if anyone is out there in the world saying, okay, I'm going to add up the cast vote record, I'm going to verify that it matches the aggregated totals. Gee, they don't match, therefore the aggregated totals are wrong. No, the aggregated totals are the thing that is what drives their whole machine. And unfortunately, the audit records, the cast vote record and the ballot images don't necessarily match the aggregated data, which is what they use for their actual results. So now recommendations, especially this is for election officials. The CVR and ballot images must be manually cleared when the election is cleared. So you can't, the system does not do that for you. It's a defect in ES&S. Also, I consider a defect is that careful tracking of uploading thumb drives is necessary outside and in addition to anything that ES&S provides, which I don't think they provide very much. You have to keep a separate spreadsheet or little hand sheet that says for every single thumb drive if it's been uploaded as an additional procedure to make sure that they're all gathered up. Please note, ES&S never compares the cast vote record to the aggregated result. That's unfortunate because they just assume, okay, they're going to match. They were matching in the machine, so nothing can go wrong. No, there's things that can go wrong because of these various slips that we could have here. An important note is that the CVR may not be useful for performing ranked choice voting. Okay, if it has these extra records or not enough, then it is not going to be an accurate representation of the election. This was encountered, we believe, in the New York election that happened recently when they were trying to do ranked choice voting. And they found that the CVR still had data from the logic and accuracy test there. And the people were castigated for doing this. But actually, it was a function that the ES&S, when they said clear the election, it didn't clear out the data. And this is the same issue coming up and cropping its head again. If you do an audit, the first thing you need to do is you need to sum up the CVR and compare it with the aggregated official result. Because you can't use that cast vote record blindly. You need to check it. The ballot images any ballot image audit may find correlation with the images because think about it, we got a cast vote record and an image every single time, and they're going to match each other in terms of what votes we find there. But there's a whole additional set that were included. So it's important that those have to be added up, and indeed AuditEngine does do that because in fact this issue was detected using AuditEngine because we could not get the numbers to add up. And I guess that's the last slide. So essentially, I wanted to put this out now for anybody who is potentially adding up data from the CVRs and questioning whether it's good, because I know a lot of people are starting to do that now. And we need to understand, especially for ES&S, how this works. This does not apply to Dominion. Dominion has, and you should be if you're asking for Dominion cast vote records, make sure you get the JSON type because it has much more metadata in it. And they do add up, at least from what I can tell, the cast vote records to generate their aggregated totals. So they don't have this problem. But I'm not going to try to cover the Dominion cast vote records and the issues there because there are some. But here I just wanted to cover this particular issue with the ES&S. So again, this is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight. We make AuditEngine, the auditing platform that does ballot image auditing. And you can come and visit us at auditengine.org. Ask me if you have any questions, please contact me. Thank you.